Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Thailand and Cambodia have agreed to an immediate ceasefire, pledging to halt weeks of deadly border clashes from noon local time. A joint statement says the truce covers all weapons and bans attacks on civilians, infrastructures, and military targets. A Russian drone and missile barrage on Kyiv kills one person, wounds dozens, and leaves hundreds of thousands without power and heating in freezing temperatures. The hours-long air alert comes ahead of President Volodymyr Zelensky's planned meeting with President Donald Trump to discuss a possible peace plan. Saudi-led forces warn that they are ready to act directly against Yemen's separatists, while Riyadh urges them to peacefully hand back seized territory. Saudi officials say the priority is protecting civilians after strikes in Hadramaut and escalating tensions with the UAE-backed forces. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio urges restraint and diplomacy as violence in Yemen escalates. He says Washington supports efforts towards a lasting solution while avoiding taking sides between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Israel becomes the first country to formally recognize Somaliland as an independent state, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promising cooperation in key sectors. Somalia opposes secession, while President Donald Trump says he does not support U.S. recognition of Somaliland. French police arrest a man suspected of stabbing 3 women in the Paris metro during year-end festivities. Prosecutors say he's tracked through surveillance footage and his mobile phone before being detained north of Paris. The UN Secretary General says attacks on civilians and places of worship are unacceptable and calls for those responsible to be brought to justice. At least 8 worshippers are killed in an explosion at a mosque in predominantly Alawite area of Homs claimed by an Islamist group. Argentina's Congress approves the 2026 budget, the first under President Javier Milei, including about $102 billion in spending and projecting 5% growth with 10.1% inflation. The plan forecasts a primary surplus of 1.2% of GDP, marking a return to formal budget approval after 2 years of rollovers. Now for this hour, we start with Ukraine and Russia. Russia has attacked Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine with hundreds of missiles and drones. And this comes ahead of what President Volodymyr Zelensky said would be a crucial meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump on Sunday, tomorrow, to work out a deal to end nearly 4 years of war. Zelensky cast the vast overnight attack as Russia's response to the ongoing peace efforts brokered by Washington. He said that the attacks involved about 500 drones, 40 missiles, and knocked out power and heat in parts of the capital. As per reports, 1 person was killed by the attack in the Kyiv region, while at least 28 people were wounded in the capital itself, including 2 children. Now, before we dive into the discussion, here are some visuals from Kyiv where drones buzzing, gunfire, and blasts can be heard. Let's listen in. As the Russia-Ukraine war continues to be at a fragile state, meetings between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russian officials have become crucial. Ahead of Sunday's meeting with the United States President, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will also be with EU allies at a stopover in Canada by video. Now, for this discussion, we are welcoming retired Major General A.K. Sylvanie. He's a geostrategic expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, retired Major General Sylvanie, for joining us again. Good to have you. Now, looking at this, what do you think, what will be on the table once again, in the priorities this time? And since we know that last week also there were talks and we did not hear any breakthrough, what can we expect this time?
First of all, one must understand as to why Russia is now attacking with all its might just 24 hours before before Zelensky and Donald Trump meet in US. This is just to put a tremendous pressure, not only on Ukraine but also on the NATO countries, that Russia means business. Russia has managed to destroy a majority of their energy sector, communication system, then command and control system, supply chain has been disrupted. Now trying to hit on Kyiv with almost about 800 to 1,000 drones and about 100 cruise missiles, including hypersonic missiles like Kinjal and then Iskander and Caliber missile. Russia is just sending a message that they mean business. They are not ready to compromise. If there has to be a compromise, it will be on the Russian terms. Now that's a message that they are trying to send by this massive attack that they have launched on Kyiv, which is a center of power as far as Ukraine is concerned, just 24 hours before Zelensky and Donald Trump meet. Now, as far as this 20 peace plan which is being revised is considered, it is a question of give and take. Now, this is the best deal which can be there because now Zelensky has agreed that the Donbas area, which include Donetsk and Luhansk, the area which has been already occupied by Russia, the Russia can have that area, which is almost 80% of that Donbas area. But the remaining 20%, the Ukraine troops will withdraw, and this will be a demilitarized buffer zone. As far as Zaporizhia and Kherson is concerned, I think there is no compromise. They want it back, Zaporizhia and Kherson, especially Zaporizhia nuclear plant. Now, this is what it is there as far as the land is concerned. The second thing is that the Ukraine wants a security guarantee, something akin to Article 5 of NATO, which says attack on one country is attack on all members countries of NATO. Something very similar, which is to be given by US, NATO and European countries. Now that is the second issue which is there, which will be discussed. And third thing which will be discussed is to a roadmap for basically as to how this deal will be there once the front line will be frozen. So that will be also discussed between Donald Trump and Zelensky. Remember that Zelensky, before coming and meeting Donald Trump, he is going via Poland. He wants to go via Poland because the supply chain comes from Poland. And then he is stopping over to Canada. And then again, through video telegraphy and video talk, he will be also consulting other European countries and NATO countries before he meets Donald Trump. But overall, it looks like that there are chances that something will build up. But it all depends whether Putin is ready to accept it. Because Putin is not ready to give any land which it has already taken, including Crimea, which has taken place in 2014. That is the Donbas area, Zaporizhia and Kherson. And Putin wants writing that sort of guarantee that basically Ukraine will not join NATO in future. And third thing is, it wants that the military strength of Ukraine to be reduced almost about 50%. And fourth thing is that the election to take place in Ukraine once the ceasefire is signed. I think that is what the Putin is saying. But majority of demands by and large have been accepted, including elections after the ceasefire, also Donbas area. What what about Zaporozhye and Kherson? That's the main thing, which is a sticking point. And not joining NATO, will they give it in writing? That also is very important. So one hope that something comes out it, because Donald Trump is very keen that some sort of breakthrough is there, and it will time will only tell. Let's see how things will build up. But as on today, the Russia is going all out, attacking the Ukraine, especially the power center Kiev, and the people there are without light, power, and water.
Yes, thank you very much, Major General, for sharing that insight and covering it all for us. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Europe. Italian police says that they have arrested 7 people suspected of raising millions of euros for the Palestinian group Hamas, and have also issued international arrest warrants for 2 others outside the country. According to a police statement, the associations officially supporting Palestinian civilians but allegedly serving as a front for funding Hamas are implicated in the investigation. The 9 individuals are accused of having financed approximately $8 million to associations based in Gaza, the Palestinian territories, or Israel-owned, controlled, or linked to Hamas. According to reports, while the official objective of the 3 associations was to collect donations for humanitarian purposes for the Palestinian people, more than 71% was earmarked for the direct financing of Hamas or entities affiliated with the Islamist movement. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Andrew Latham. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Mr. Latham, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how dangerous is it that such thing has now come out in light, and what do you think when people giving donation, what should they be more careful about?
Well, this episode underscores a couple of very important points. One of which is that disrupting just a moment here, the financial underpinnings of groups like Hamas is very, very important, and it's something which the Europeans have had, let's say, a mixed track record regarding. Not terribly effective. But if you're going to combat terrorism and you're going to combat terrorist organizations, disrupting the financial infrastructure is key. The second important point is that these are registered charities that are raising money. Europeans are giving money on the understanding that it's being used for hospitals and providing food and various kinds of humanitarian aid. And in fact, it seems that the vast majority of these funds in this particular case are being directed to Hamas. Now, Hamas has does have a humanitarian side, has a political side, but it's also a terrorist organization and has been designated as such by most Western countries. And there's no doubt that that money is going to fund their military campaign, at least as much as its humanitarian efforts. So Europeans have been hoodwinked, and I can't imagine that your average European is going to be thrilled by this, or is going to give more money to this particular charity, or perhaps any charity, because they don't want to be funding the war. They want their money to go towards humanitarian purposes. So those are the 2 big elements here, I think. The necessity of disrupting the financial infrastructure, and the fact that some of these registered charities are not doing what they are legally obliged to do, which is provide the money for the humanitarian purposes that they raised it for.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. And Professor, what responsibilities do EU states have to prevent such, charitable fundraising from being diverted to militant groups like Hamas?
Well, the most obvious one, of course, is that they will be watching a lot more closely now. Their regulatory agencies, perhaps law enforcement agencies, perhaps intelligence agencies, will be paying close attention to these charities to make sure that the money they're raising for charitable humanitarian purposes is being spent on charitable and humanitarian projects. The infrastructure is there in Europe. The policing, the regulatory infrastructure. What has been lacking thus far, it seems, is the political will. And now I think that's changing. Now that this has come to light, I think there'll be pressure domestically from European populations, in this case the Italian people, but also internationally from the US and others. There's going to be a lot of pressure to, hey, get your act together, start using the instruments of statecraft that you have at your disposal to monitor these organizations, to make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing, what they're legally obliged to do with the money they raise, and not fund terrorist groups and not fund terrorist activities.
Yes. And lastly, should international laws on terrorism financing, how should this be strengthened or more strictly enforced across borders?
Well, the thing is that outfits like Hamas and some of their fellow travelers, as it were, like to exploit the seams between agencies within governments, but also across governments. And so this highlights the need, not just for the Italian state to pay more attention, but also for countries that do not think that Hamas should be receiving these kind of funds and financing, that there needs to be more cooperation, and needs to be better institutionalized, more sharing of information. I have no doubt that that already goes on to a significant degree, but clearly there are seams, there are gaps that need to be filled, and so there needs to be perhaps another layer added of cooperation, collaboration, and communication between governments across the world.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for sharing that, Mr. Latham. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. President of the Commonwealth of Dominica Republic, Sylvanie Burton, has called on the United States to stop what she described as bullying tactics against Venezuela and to pursue dialogue instead of confrontation. Speaking in a televised interview, Burton has criticized Washington's increased military presence in the Caribbean near Venezuela, along with expanding sanctions and what she called threats against the oil-rich nation. Since late August, the U.S. has stepped up naval deployments in the region and carried out dozens of strikes on vessels in the Caribbean Sea and Pacific Ocean operations, it says, are part of its war on drug cartels, according to U.S. figures. Those strikes have killed more than 100 people. Burton has urged the U.S. to respect Venezuela's sovereignty and abandon aggressive policies towards smaller nations. She said countries in Latin America and the Caribbean were united in calling for peaceful negotiations and mutual respect, warning against attempts to pressure or destabilize governments through force. Let's listen in.
Every government must be respected. Our appeal to the U.S. is to let there be discussions. Let us sit at the table instead of having wars, instead of trying to remove governments in power, instead of moving to each other's country because we are smaller than you and you are more equipped than us and bullying us into submission. And so for us in the Caribbean, we are calling on the U.S. to cease that aggression against Venezuela. I think the entire Latin America and the Caribbean is singing one voice, and we can only hope that the U.S. will listen and will respect Venezuela's sovereignty.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Andrew Latham. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Mr. Latham, for staying with us. Now looking at this, U.S. has kind of shifted their tactic from military to economic. But where is this line between enforcing security interests and violating national sovereignty in this case?
Yes, well, it's a reflex on the part of smaller countries around the world, but in this case in the Caribbean and Latin America, to talk about their preference for diplomacy and their insistence on maintaining all states' national sovereignty so that they can maintain their own national sovereignty. Those are very reflexive responses to what's going on in the Caribbean at the moment, and entirely predictable. There's another layer here which affects some countries. I think the Commonwealth of Dominica not quite as much, but many countries that are around Venezuela are already hosting tremendous numbers of refugees, and they certainly don't want another flood of refugees. They can't handle the refugees that they've already got from Venezuela. So they prefer a diplomatic solution to this problem rather than a military one, which would generate more asylum seekers and refugees. So that's, I think, what's going on here. There are countries in the Caribbean that are supporting the United States in its efforts to curtail both the narco-trafficking, but also what this is really about is about China's and Russia's and Iran's influence in the Western Hemisphere, because they all have close relations with Venezuela. That, more than the narcotics angle, is what's driving all of this. And there are many countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region that would support that. But all of them prefer, in the first instance, diplomacy. All of them insist on respecting national sovereignty, in this case Venezuela's, because it reinforces the norm, which then protects their own national sovereignty. But if that doesn't work, if diplomacy doesn't work, there are a number of countries in the region that will support more robust American military action.
Thank you for highlighting that. And building on that, as diplomacy is of course encouraged, do Venezuela and U.S. have any common ground to begin diplomacy or dialogue with?
Yes, I think there's some ground. I mean, there are things that the Maduro regime is not going to negotiate away. Maduro's not going to step down. I can't see that happening. He's not going to dismantle his regime. And I don't think, because of the way in which his regime is entangled with the narco-trafficking industry, if I can call it that, I don't think that's going to change. But what could change is limiting, reducing, minimizing, or even ending Venezuela's close geopolitical relations with China and Russia.
1 2.
That's entirely possible, and it depends on what the United States, which will bring carrots and sticks to the table. Depends on what mix is there, but I think there is scope for the Americans to back off a little bit if Caracas agrees, the Maduro regime agrees, to begin to dial back its geopolitical relations with China, Russia, and Iran. Remains to be seen. Negotiations are always non-linear. They can go any direction. But in principle, on paper, there is scope for a diplomatically negotiated deal which more or less satisfies both Washington and Caracas.
Thank you for laying it out all there for us, Mr. Latham. With that, I would like to end this discussion. Now we move on to Greece. In Greece, over 131 migrants were rescued off of southern Crete by the Coast Guard today. A boat carrying migrants was spotted about 14 nautical miles south of Gavdos, south of Crete. All aboard were rescued and taken first to Gavdos before being transferred to Crete. With this latest operation, the total number of people rescued in the area over the past 5 days has reached 840 people. According to the reports, many are arriving in makeshift boats, creating severe pressure on local facilities. Just a day earlier, more than 500 migrants were taken to a temporary center in Agia Iraklio, which is now facing overcrowding. Officials have warned that the surge highlights ongoing risks for people attempting dangerous sea crossings to reach Crete. Now we move on to U.S. California has dropped a lawsuit challenging the decision by the administration of President Donald Trump to cancel more than $4 billion in federal grants for the state's high-speed rail project. The California's High-Speed Rail Authority, which filed the suit in July, said the decision to abandon it reflected the state's assessment that the federal government is not a reliable, constructive, or trustworthy partner in advancing high-speed rail in California. The agency said it plans to move forward without federal funding, adding that only 18% of the program's expenditures for the long-delayed project have come from federal funds. A judge earlier rejected a bid to dismiss the lawsuit. The U.S. Transportation Department and White House have not yet responded to the requests for any comments. Originally planned for completion by 2020 at a cost of $33 billion, the project is now forecast to cost between $89 billion and $128 billion, with service now expected to start by 2033. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.